Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today I found a pretty interesting article from National Geographic, and it's titled 1500-Year-Old Garbage Dumps Reveal City's Surprising Collapse. It revolves around the city of Alusa, at the time was known as Alusa, and now is called Haluza, which is in Israel, in the Negev desert. And here's a map of it. So the Negev desert is on the bottom here in the southern part, and then I think the city is basically where my cursor is around this area, pretty almost smack dab in the middle of the desert and quite a ways south from Jerusalem. And this article is really interesting because the archaeologists actually analyze the trash heaps of the people of the Eastern Byzantine Empire at the time, which was under Byzantine rule. The reason why this article was so interesting is because they're starting to wise up on not only examining trash as like a viable option of inquiry and study, but also it led them down toward climate data. And what they found out from analyzing this trash was not only did they find out that the downfall of this particular city occurred a lot earlier than they thought, also it coincided with a little ice age, a global cooling, which was then followed by the Justinian plague, which was the first of the plagues. Later on, there was another plague right before the Renaissance. And another thing that they found out were these volcanoes had erupted. But anyway, I'm kind of bearing the lead here. So we're in the Negev desert, and this Alusa, the city of Alusa, was actually a very, very prominent trading town. Their primary goods that they were shipping around were the wines, the Mediterranean wine. What they noticed was the economic systems in that region, the social systems of that region just suddenly collapsed, and conventional knowledge was that, this is kind of coincides with the early Islamic period of the Middle East, the rise of the Caliphate in the mid 7th century. But that actually turned out not to be the case because the dates didn't match up. So this is kind of exposing this assumption that was long held in academia. So they take a look at these municipal garbage dumps, and the reason why they do that is because the head archaeologist got it in his head that, well, if we look at a prominent city like this and we take a look at the garbage, let's just find out when the garbage abruptly stops, and then from there we can probably find a few clues as to why things shut down. Because if the garbage isn't organized or isn't taken care of, then that's kind of a huge clue that some of the infrastructure of the city just fell apart. What they found out was the city's decline occurred almost 100 years before the actual Islamic influences came into the area, and which I'll get into a little bit later. What actually happened was, like I mentioned earlier, a quick shift in climate. So it's not just things getting cold. It has a lot to do with these volcanic eruptions. And what they think is when I think a series of 3 eruptions happened in 536, and then a couple more happened in the decades after that. And what it did was it blotted out the sky, and there was a drop in global temperatures. And what that does is it messes up crop yield. In some places, the agriculture, if you have a bad crop in a lot of places of the world, that means a lot of people starve. That means there's not as much commerce as there should be. People are losing money, and as a whole, everything just goes to shit. And that's exactly what happened, and that kind of puts more into perspective why the Roman Empire and then the later Byzantine Empire falls apart, and they go through this pretty rapid decline. Although it took quite a few more centuries for the Byzantine Empire to completely dissolve, but still you can see these declines happen all throughout history. So they excavate these urban garbage dumps, which they could still see on the outskirts of the land, which is really interesting because that stuff lasted a while, and that's almost 1,500 years or so that just trash was laying around. And this wasn't like trash that like you normally think of, like if you go outside and you look into the dumpster. It's more like broken pots, bones, remnants of meat, and all that stuff, and residue from meat, stuff like that. And they found that the main dump stopped receiving trash around 550, which is a lot earlier than they thought, which was much later. And then it correlates with new developments in climate science, which show that in the middle of the 6th century was actually a horrible time to be alive. Randall Carlson kind of talks about this when he talks about King Arthur and the Holy Grail, and the story of the Grail being the sign of restoration and regrowth, and therefore an increased human activity and thriving of cities and science and ideas and all that stuff. Well, these were truly the Dark Ages, because around that time that Arthur was living was around this time, 500 or so AD. What happened was we were going through another ice age, a late antique little ice age, which lasted in this case 536 to 660, which are very interesting dates because, again, this is when the Justinian plague hit, and this is when we see the Serbs, the Croats, and the rise of Islam right after this. So there was a collapse, and then when things started warming a little bit again, there were people waiting in the wings to take power, basically. And that was an idea that was not considered for a long time, and which is the main reason why I want to share this with you guys today, is because it sounds like it's common sense now, but it's unprecedented in the academic realm. So this cluster of volcanic eruptions I mentioned, 536, 540, and 547. So that period of 11 years was very, very devastating to the entire world. And things can happen on the flip of a hat, on the drop of a hat, rather. Food shortages, famine, all that stuff. As soon as the temperature drops, you can say goodbye to civilization, essentially. So Randall always says that we shouldn't be fearing global warming. We should be fearing global cooling. That should be what's terrifying. Researchers suggested that the climate events may also be associated with major social changes that started in the middle of the 6th century from the expansion of Slavic populations. I just mentioned this, the collapse of the Eastern Turk Empire in Northeast Asia. So all these empires started collapsing around the same time. And here's a nice map. This is about 600 AD or so. So this would be right in the thick of this little ice age period. And what you can see is, you see this cognate here, and the Magyars, and then we have the Sassanids to the east. These guys, a lot of the people who were able to survive and thrive were the hardy nomadic types, and that also is very telling as well, because again, there's this opportunistic element to history that we just sort of overlook, whereas the more traditional academic outlook is things were more, I guess there's more of a veil of stability, which is not the case at this time. So anyway, moving on, Justinian plague happens, and this guy, Buntgen, I think he's one of the head researchers involved in the study, he says that our decision-making in our systems are not operating independently from environment and climate conditions. So he's pointing out the awareness that researchers and scientists and archaeologists have to, what I've always said is we got to cross-examine different research from different subjects and see if there's any correlation. And climate is one of the main subjects that we should delve into if we want to look into archaeology and archaeological history and the history of empires and all that stuff, because that gives you a rough, I guess, skeleton of what to expect. So for example, if we read about this little ice age, we look at the dates and then we keep those dates in mind and look at an empire like the Byzantine Empire, then we can come to the logical conclusion that, oh yeah, it makes sense that the Byzantine Empire would go through some period of chaos and decline, judging by the climate information that shows that it was really cold and the crop yield was terrible. So, and trading wasn't thriving as much as it would in the past. So that's a very interesting wrinkle, and I believe, you just asked me, that must have had a lot to do with the fall of the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire and other empires like the Turkish Empire. Linking long-duration environmental phenomena to discrete historical events remains challenging, and scientists haven't reconstructed exactly how the late antique ice age affected the Negev, which is the desert. Rapid cooling may have been disastrous for crops in Ireland and Scandinavia. Blah, blah, blah. Elusa's economy still relied on outside markets that might have been suffering. So yeah, if you have a market that's connected from Western Europe all the way to the Middle East, if one area happens to get more devastated than the other, the one that's not as devastated is still going to feel the effects because they have no trading partner, because their partner is going through hell. And that, although very complex and must be looked through with the fine-tooth comb, it's now become almost protocol to check the climate records now whenever making some suggestion about history. And I think that's fascinating, and that's a good step in the right direction. The findings from Elusa are part of a new trend to look at the complex web of environmental factors that might have influenced social change across the empire. Garbage is an underused archaeological clue about the past. I agree. And why haven't people looked into this earlier? Maybe there were a group of scientists who were looking at this 20 years ago or something like that, or had this idea, and then maybe their paper just fell through the cracks. Maybe no one took their idea seriously. Who knows? But at least now it's better late than never, right? At least now it's happening. We know that the 6th century AD experienced an unusually violent series of volcanic eruptions, triggering abrupt climate change, and even more importantly, the beginning of the bubonic plague pandemic. This study is yet further evidence that these environmental shocks were extremely disruptive to the societies that lived through them. Okay, so that's really, here's a picture of one of the ruins in Elusa, or modern day Haluza. Yeah, guys, I think this is very interesting. Even though the Eastern Roman Empire was fracturing and going down, it still must have been robust to even survive through that period, that century-long ice age, or almost longer than a century, and to come out the other end, although battered, still intact. Because the Byzantine Empire didn't dissolve until like the 11 or I think almost 1200 or something like that, almost up until the Mongols. So again, that's really, really interesting, because as we come out of the Ice Age, not only are these we tend to go through a golden age, like the Renaissance is a good example, or the other end of the spectrum happens, like the Mongol hordes come out of the woodwork and they take over. So either way, it's very fascinating to go back and look through history again and see how the climate really did affect them. And then you can start plugging in holes and filling in more pieces in this puzzle that we call, I guess, not ancient history, but I mean, 1,500 years, I guess that's ancient history, right? Yeah, when we go back and look through history, and we can see a clearer picture, and then from there we can start filling in not only these holes, but also the context, and then we can go back and look at the decisions certain leaders made, and we can factor in other elements, such as the climate, into their decision-making ability. So let me know what you guys think about this. Leave me some stuff in the comments if you know of any other studies that utilize trash, or the analysis of trash, or even climate history and climate research that's been integrated into archaeology. And let me know what you guys think. And also one quick announcement. I started an account on D Live, so I'll have the link in the description, and I really want to get live streams going of basically this, but more covering more articles, and I think D Live is a good, a good launching pad to do that, a good medium to do that. Because YouTube Live, although I do enjoy, although I have used it in the past, I feel like I would just get more viewers out there, because I think the algorithm is not really working when I go live. But when I upload a regular video, it seems to be okay. I think the numbers seem to be going. There's an upward trend. But I want to try this DLive thing out, so go ahead and subscribe to me there, and please like and subscribe and share, or leave a comment on my videos. That does go a long way. I do want to get more eyeballs on my videos. That would be great. And if you guys have any questions, I want to either leave me a comment here, or you can tweet at me at the Jindo, and you could just ask me questions, and I could go through a mailbag or some sort. So I have another segment to share with you guys and answer some questions for you guys, so you guys can, I guess, get to know me a little bit more. Although I have been doing this, I think this is episode like 120 or something like that. I'm getting close to 150, and probably in a few months I'll get there. And it still hasn't been a year though. So just let me know what you guys think. Give me some feedback. It's always welcome. And I'll talk to you guys later.